What's up, everyone? I'm Ryan Wolt. Welcome to week 4 of the Roast West Coast podcast. This podcast is all about coffee, and in season 1, it's all about the innovators behind coffee in North County, San Diego. It's about learning a little bit more about this beverage that for so many of us is this little stabilizing force that somehow helps us set the tone for each and every day. This episode is sponsored by acclaimed roaster Steady State Roasting. At Steady State, they roast responsibly traded coffee sourced from around the world. Order small batch roasted coffee beans on steadystateroasting.com. And as a special treat, Roast West Coast listeners can use the promo code OWL10. That's capital letters OWL, followed by the numbers 10, OWL10, to get 10% off their purchase of coffee beans at steadystateroasting.com. Their house blend, Space Traveler, is one of the best around. I even wrote it down in my notebook. It said, Space Traveler, one of the best house coffees around. You can find it on steadystateroasting.com. For today's show, I'll be sharing my conversation with Siri Simran Khalsa. She's the director of coffee at Lofty Coffee, which is a very cool title. The Lofty Coffee Roasting Works facility is right near downtown Encinitas, California, and they also have cafes in Little Italy, Solana Beach, and the La Costa neighborhood of Carlsbad. One of the great things about meeting all of these North County San Diego coffee innovators is really getting a better understanding of the supply chain involved in the process of getting coffee from the plant into my cup of coffee. How different companies treat that process and establish traceability along the way differs greatly. And in Siri's case, she was really inspired by a trip she and her team took just before the pandemic lockdown. You're going to hear all about it. You're going to hear about the Lofty Coffee roasting philosophy and how they manage being an all-from-scratch everything company. This podcast is recorded virtually right now in an effort to stay socially distant. And Siri and I had about 1 million tech glitches. But luckily there was a backup recording so I can bring you the whole conversation. But you might notice a change in the audio about midway through. Just a heads up. And now it's time for another cup of good coffee and the show. Okay.
Cool.
So how about this? I'm going to just start over from the beginning.
Yeah, let's do it. We had such a natural progression. Dang, technology.
We really did.
But
I mean, I'll use that as like a teaser. Be like, this is what happens when you're terrible at podcasting.
yeah, hey, some of it's out of our control.
Hello, Siri.
Hello.
Welcome again. And thanks for joining me on the Roast West Coast podcast to talk about Lofty Coffee. You are the director of coffee, which is a very cool title. And I'm wondering what it is that you do. What is a director of coffee?
Yeah, so I'm happy you asked because it is definitely a multifaceted role here at Lofty. We're a very small team operating 5 cafes. So as director of coffee, I am hands-on in creating all the training material and signage that goes into a coffee menu and educating our teams to correctly brew our coffee. And then up on that, I'm also working with our junior roaster, Joey, in developing roast profiles and doing all of our sample roasting and production roasting, as well as managing our production team in bagging, packaging, delivering, and then one step further in the supply chain, also working with importers and producers to source really awesome coffee that just tastes good and has awesome stories. So that sums up my role really quickly. But, again, there's a lot of time on AI and Photoshop as well as on the cupping table. So it's kind of this multifaceted role.
A lot of different moving parts and problem solving, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
I want to get to sourcing in just a minute, but before that, I wanted to kind of talk about you and how you got into coffee in the first place, and like what was the path that brought you to these great heights as a coffee director at Lofty Coffee.
Yeah, so before moving to San Diego, I lived in New York City, and I was going to school there. So I was in college, and like many other baristas, I needed a job to pay my way through art school. And yeah, I landed a job in a cafe, and I've always...
Which one?
So my first ever coffee job was for this Korean coffee chain called Cafe Bene. But that brought me to a little smaller second wave coffee shops. But where I really found my love for specialty coffee and learned that I wanted to pursue a career in the industry was working for a company that It was known as the name of Toby's Estate, but is now known as Partners Coffee. They've recently changed their name and gone through a rebranding. And they, between their education program and having really awesome roasters who were very friendly and inviting to the cupping table, showed me that there was actually career paths in the industry and that it wasn't just this customer facing job, which I actually really do love. Today was really busy, and actually I spent an hour on bar with some of our baristas this morning. So that really opened my eyes to seeing the greater supply chain in coffee, and that there's also many different avenues to pursue a career, whether it's in management, leadership, sales, green buying, roasting. That was a really amazing opportunity I had, and I give a lot of thanks to Chris, who was my barista trainer, and Tyler, who was one of the roasters, who they both just instilled in me an excitement. And from there, I moved to San Diego, and my grandmother found me an ad on Craigslist that said coffee professional. And it was a job for Lofty Coffee, and that was 5 years ago, and here I am today.
You mentioned sourcing before. I know you guys took an origin trip not long before the pandemic, I believe. Where did you go, and what was it like? Was there a difference in your approaches before and after, or in general on origin trips at all?
Mm-hmm.
And how does that impact how you guys treat your roasting sessions now?
Yeah, so we did take a trip to Costa Rica and Guatemala. We literally got back like a week before we shut all our cafes down. So it was interesting transition of going and meeting our producers and tasting the coffees that we were going to buy for the next year, and then to shut all our cafes down was just a really strange shift. But to talk a little bit more about that trip, so that was actually the second origin trip I've ever gone on. We tend to take 1 to 2 trips a year, and I had gone on one previously. And so this was like the second trip, and I put it all together, worked with our importers, our hosts, our producers to make it happen. It was actually very fun to play travel agent. And I love traveling and have fortunately been able to travel a lot. But again, this was like my second trip for the purpose of buying coffee and meeting our producers. So it was a little bit new for me, and I definitely took a lot away from it. Going into it, we work with an importer in Costa Rica called the Coffee Source, and I've been talking to a man named Fernando, and he kind of helped us. He's like our man on the floor in Costa Rica who helps us like connect with our producers. And then in Guatemala, we're working with a import company called Primavera. And that was just such an incredible experience, going from, landing in Guatemala City to taking a 15 passenger plane to Huehuetenango and taking a many hour winding dirt road trip up into the mountains to stay and meet with our producers. And one thing I really took away from that trip was having a deeper understanding for the nuances in the processing methods that different producers apply to their coffee, which then really translates to these incredible differences. And it was really cool to see Primavera works really closely with agronomists who then also help out their farmers to produce better coffee. So they're bringing these like techniques and tools to producers who may not otherwise have access to. And again, being able to work closely with Primavera, who then connect us closer to our farmers, not only does it give us a reassurance that the coffee is being produced really well, it gives us a reassurance that the farmers are receiving something from our end as well, and that being education, training, assistance, and then overall a higher price for their coffee. So again, really getting a closer look at how these coffees are processed was something that I took away, and I'm really trying to apply in the way that I now buy coffee, cupping with Nadine, who's the owner and operator of Primavera. She's a certified badass. She just like will cup the coffee, and she's like, this is fermented. Like, she just has this ability to taste these nuances in the way that processing affects the coffee that I just admire immensely. And so now that just gave me a new perspective in tasting coffee and being able to see, oh, is that actually like a really delicious fruit flavor, or is that like a funky, moldy, fermented flavor? Uh, so kind of training your palate around that.
There's a really interesting skill to tasting coffee.
Yeah.
The first time that I ever tried coffee with like an intention to taste flavors, Chris O'Brien was kind of guiding me through it and saying, well, what do you taste? And all I could say was, I taste brown. It tastes brown to me. I don't really know what you're going for. And he's like, well, do you taste any fruit flavors? And I was like, I think you're insane. I don't taste anything out of there. And he's like, I'm telling you, there's like a blueberry flavor that you should be pulling out of there as like the predominant taste. And I said, you're crazy. Like, there's no blueberry in here. And we literally, a woman was passing by on the sidewalk, and I flagged her down, and I asked her to taste the coffee. And I asked her, it's just a random person on the street. I said, well, what do you taste? She goes, oh, wow, this is amazing. It tastes exactly like blueberries. And I just lost it. I was like, no. And that was kind of,
what am I missing?
that was the first moment I realized that there's such a skill to tasting coffee and appreciating it. That's different than just drinking it because you're trying to get a caffeine fix. And something that really kind of forced me down this path to appreciate it a little bit more and what it takes to do that. And I've gotten a lot better.
Well, something about cupping and just these subtle flavors that coffee has, and the skill in tasting it, and something that I really appreciate about the practice of that is what it does is it requires you to like recall memory. And so it's like really being like, what does a blueberry taste like? Like, how do you describe that? How do you pinpoint that? To me is just like really cool. I'm sure like many other people in beverage and food industries, like I love food, and I travel to taste different foods that I've never tasted before, and go to bars and taste drinks I've never thought I'd drink before. And being able to be curious in that way is just very exciting to me.
Yeah, I definitely can agree with that. And now when I'm able to taste something, I get kind of a nice a joy out of it. But it also makes me a little angrier when it doesn't taste the way I want it. Angry is not the right word, but I'm like, oh, come on, like, I know this. Yeah. I know this coffee is good, and maybe I just brewed it wrong, or I forgot to do something. And that's a really interesting thing too. Is you're so dependent on your customers to some extent who are buying your beans to also be able to have the skill to brew your coffee so that it tastes 100%. The way that you want it to. And that's something that I think is really unique to coffee, where you're dependent on your audience and on educating them to some extent on how to treat your coffee. You know, maybe don't throw it in the back of the freezer for a year.
Yeah, I think that's another where I feel like a part of my job as that director of coffee or whatever, as someone who is passionate within the industry, is to find ways to bridge that gap. And, you know, the reality is not everyone's there. Like, not everyone's going to understand paying $5 for a cup of coffee. You know, you have that guest who's like, well, I paid 99 cents at 7-Eleven. But bringing that knowledge of why it's important for us to pay more for coffee. Again, to touch on the trip that we just took to Guatemala, what was really cool about traveling with Primavera is, so they are, not only are they an import company, they're also an export company. So they're buying parchment from the farmers. So that's coffee still in parchment. And then they're milling the bean, and then they're exporting it and importing it. So we were able to see the coffee go from the farm, get processed at the farm, go to multiple storage units on the way to being dry milled, to then being bagged for export, to then being imported. And just the amount of people involved in that, and the fact that the C market right now, I believe, that being the coffee market, is at $1.10. So for 1 pound of coffee that takes a year to produce, the farmer's only getting $1.10 for that.
Wow.
And then that has to disperse to the pickers, to the agronomists, to the drivers, to all these people that are involved, it just doesn't make sense, really, that we pay so little for coffee, because it doesn't make it a sustainable supply chain on the other end. And so being that bridge in any way that is possible by being on this podcast and sharing that story, I have this awesome video of these guys hauling 100-pound coffee bags on their back and throwing them into a truck. And it's just like, this is like a group of people who are putting in a lot of work so that we can enjoy our mornings and wake up.
If people could take away one thing maybe from this podcast in general, is that the journey of their coffee doesn't start when the roaster makes their cup of coffee in the morning. You know, it starts, like you mentioned, a year before, and it goes through all these steps. It has a whole lifetime before it gets to the roaster, who then roasts the beans for you. And if that is worth $3, then great. If it's worth $10, then great, or $5, or whatever it is. And but it's being aware of that there's this whole process that goes into the coffee you drink. And I think in general, in the United States at least, there's kind of a little bit of an awakening to the idea that our food actually comes from somewhere. It doesn't just show up at the grocery store someday.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a lofty goal of sorts to inform people of that. Hey everyone, I'll be right back with the second half of my conversation with Siri about Lofty Coffee. Just a reminder that this show has great sponsors. This episode is sponsored by the award-winning Steady State Roasting in Carlsbad. If you're craving a top-notch, handcrafted coffee drink, pre-order one on their website, steadystateroasting.com, then head over to their sensory lab on State Street in Carlsbad Village to pick it up. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please check out roastwestcoast.com for more coffee content, including show transcripts, recaps, promotions, and please consider subscribing to the bonus content, which directly supports the creation of this show and future shows. And now, back to my conversation with Siri. You mentioned that trip happening right before the pandemic. The coronavirus is like this wet blanket of awfulness, just kind of weighing everything down and kind of, I would say, preventing us from moving forward. How has it impacted you guys at Lofty? I mean, have there been unexpected impacts? How have you had to adapt to this kind of new business life?
Yeah. So just to tie the end with the origin, something that we're really thankful for is that our farmers were paid for their coffees because it happened to be at a great time where their coffees were already sold, at least the producers that we're working with. So they were able to get money and get paid for this year's harvest. And so we'll see how that affects the following year. But for us here at the Roasting Works and in our cafes, it has been a wild ride, to say the least, where what can we expect? We've never had to deal with this. On March 16th, we shut down all 5 of our cafes, and that meant we had to let go of a team of about 100 people. And that was pretty devastating. And the next move of like, okay, but how do we continue? There were a few of us here, me, Chef Miguel, who's our head baker, because we're also a scratch bakery and production facility, Eric, who is our CEO, and like the 3 of us just like got together and we're like, okay, we got to do something. We still had wholesale grocery store accounts, so that meant I was behind the roaster fulfilling those accounts. We still had our online sales, which was really cool to see how now people are buying coffee online and getting it shipped to them and, brewing it themselves, hopefully in a really delicious way. Hopefully they have grinders and whatnot. But we also, just went into like survival mode. We started doing home deliveries of all of our scratch baked goods and coffee. So for anyone local, we were delivering to their door. We did that. We thought maybe that was going to be like a new business model, but we're seeing now people want to go out of their homes and enjoy a cup of coffee outside. And we've really tried to adapt the way that we're working in the cafes as well. And honestly, that might be the hardest puzzle piece right now, is how do we continue to give our guests really amazing service and keep our team safe and make everyone feel comfortable. And fortunately, we were already kind of a patio cafe concept. So all of our cafes have mostly outside seating. So that has helped us being able to still provide seating and a place for our cafe or our guests to enjoy food and drink in our cafes, but really finding a way where, because you have, Eric calls it the bug shield. We have these shields and everyone's wearing masks and everyone, please wear your masks, but it's like so hard to give that same service that we used to. Something we used to really pride ourselves in was giving service in the sense that felt like hospitality instead of customer service, where you're making someone feel at home. You know their name, you know their order before they even get to the register, if they're a regular, and it's just become a lot harder to do that. But with that, we're so happy to see people back in the cafes. We're happy to have team members back and just adapting again to like the to-go mentality now too, is like everything is in paper cups and plastic, and it just feels a little bit like a step backwards because we really tried to encourage our guests to stay and have coffee and food and ceramics and to just minimize that. So I think the challenge is how to balance that out moving forward. But again, we're back up and running and we're doing our best with like trying to make things as easy for our guests and as easy for our teams so that they can still enjoy the luxuries of specialty coffee.
Sure. Any moment that you can take a mental break from the impacts the virus has had on
Yeah.
our lives is a nice moment.
Yeah.
Whether it's coffee or a beer or something, like those are moments that you can do that.
Yeah, and I'm hoping baristas and other coffee professionals are listening to this, but I think that's a really good mentality to keep while we're serving our guests, where it's so easy to I think a lot of like customer facing and customer service has turned into a little bit of like having to deal with a lot of human emotions. And not everyone's like cut out for that. Like you don't go to a barista job thinking you're gonna have to like deal with people who are going through a really hard time. But I think it's important if you can like remember that this is that one moment someone's coming to grab a cup of coffee and maybe this is the only good positive experience they have today. And so like let's make that their highlight, because maybe the stresses of everything that are going on are too much to handle and they just need that like uplifting experience of the day. So I think that's one thing I try to keep in mind. Even I'm not really that much customer facing anymore, but even today, just making sure, say hi, look them in the eyes because you can't really see the rest of their face. Ask them their name, ask them how their day's going, make their coffee really good so that they want to come back and learn more about you and more about the coffee. And
Well, and there's also an appreciation. I mean, anytime that I leave the house, I think about it, whether it's to pick up coffee or to go to the garden center at Lowe's or anything. Like it's a process that I think about. Okay, when am I going to go? What's my battle plan going out to shop?
yeah.
So I can get in as safely and as risk-free as possible, because a lot of times, I mean, I don't worry so much about the business. I worry more about the other people. Not everyone is going to feel as strongly as maybe I do about the safety or as the business does. And so when they're choosing to come out or choosing to go to Lofty Coffee, they're saying, this is a place that I want to spend a few minutes of my time today. And that they really thought about it for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, they're choosing us instead of any other coffee shop that they could go to. And that's really, really cool, I think. I'm very prideful in that and grateful and thankful that people like the coffee that I roast. I think that's pretty dope.
Speaking of the coffee you roast, we're entering the holiday season. The whole December season is here. What are you guys doing? I know you guys make some special holiday plans. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so we do a yearly seasonal blend. It's called the West Coast Winter Blend. And the idea of being here in sunny California, Southern California, where it's like 85 degrees today in the middle of October. It's supposed to be a really delicious cup of coffee that you can enjoy throughout the holiday season and through the sunny holiday season that we have here. So this year we're planning on, I've sourced a Papua New Guinea, which over the last few years, I've really grown a love and appreciation for those coffees. They just have this incredible texture that, paired with like The one that we have right now has this like slightly woody, kind of savory quality to it, but then it also has this nice floral quality that balances that out. And just like this incredible texture, like I almost think like marshmallowy. And we're going to be blending that with a Kenyan coffee that brings this incredible acidity to the blend. So it's this nice, really full bodied, heavy coffee that has this like balance of floral and savory qualities that to me, I just think like goes so well with the holiday season, like with Thanksgiving and Christmas and any other holidays that you may be celebrating, where it just like goes really good with like a warm piece of toast or something like that. So just think like heavy bodied and just like this like balance of this sweet and savory and the West Coast winter blend.
Awesome. Anything else that, or any other ways that you would encourage appreciators of your coffees to buy or to share or to get it? Is online the best? Coming into the store? What's the best way to really make those dollars go far?
Yeah, so if you're local, come check out our roasting work. It is so cool. I wish more people knew we were here. I feel that we're a little hidden. If you're familiar with Encinitas, we are where Rhino Art used to be. It's on the 101, 97 North Coast Highway is the address. We have this incredibly huge outside patio that overlooks the 101, and you got this beautiful ocean breeze. In these days of the pandemic, we started we've always been a scratch bakery, but we just started a bread program. So we've been baking bread, sourdough, multigrain, and some specialty loaves. And you can get also a lot of our house-made goods. We make a lot of house-made nut milks, coconut milk, and oat milk, and an almond milk. It's essentially the Lofty market, and this is where the coffee is roasted. And we have just like this beautiful display that you can see the roaster, you see the coffee. We are doing 2-pound and 5-pound bags as well as our normal 12-ounce bags. So if you're looking for a bulk bag of coffee, you can find that here at our roasting works as well as on our website. So if you're not local, checking out loftycoffee.com, you can find all 12-ounce, 2 pounds, and 5-pound bags. We try to share as much about where the coffee comes from and what the experience of the coffee, that being flavor and texture, is going to be. And yeah, so come check us out. I think if you're really wanting to learn more about the coffee, coming to our roasting works. Our baristas are super friendly here and want to tell you all about the coffee. So
I'm gonna kind of wrap this up with a two-part question, which I do with everyone that I talk to, which is,
sweet.
If you're not at work, what style or type of coffee are you drinking just for you?
Mm-hmm.
Like either at home or if you went to somebody else's coffee shop.
Yeah.
And then anything else you want people to know about you or about Lofty Coffee in general?
Okay. So the first question, if I'm going to a cafe, espresso. Always. I love espresso. I think it's a great way to see how the barista is skilled and trained. It's also just like this quick shot of deliciousness that I just love. Maybe I'll get another thing, but go to espresso. At home, I have a variety of things. If I'm making breakfast with a friend, maybe I'll do a French press. If I'm making coffee for myself, maybe I'll do an AeroPress or a V60. Typically filter though at home. And then the part two, second question, something about myself. I hate to be like coffee is my identity because I'm so much more complex than that. But what I really, really love is this human connection. And if you ever have questions about coffee or want to nerd out or have like challenging theories that are just silly, please reach out to me. My name is Siri, Simran. You can, I don't know where you can find me, but yeah, I just want to know more people, whether it's in the coffee industry or out in the world. I love it all. But about Lofty Coffee, I think what makes us unique and different is the intention that we put into every product that we serve. There is a story behind literally everything on our menu. I think one of the challenges is being able to convey that. But if you ask, we're happy to tell you all about where all of our products come from. And with that, I thank you so much for having me. This is fun.
Oh, no, it was great having you here. And I would say cheers to you and thanks for being on the show. A huge thank you to Siri, Simran, and Khalsa for joining me today on the show, for putting up with all those tech glitches, and just for having a nice conversation with me. Lofty Coffee's seasonal West Coast winter blend is only around for a limited time, and it just came out last weekend. It's available for pickup at one of their cafes or order for delivery on their website, loftycoffee.com. The beans for this coffee were sourced from Kenya and Papua New Guinea, and the tasting notes include sugar plum, cranberry, fudge brownie, and pecan brittle. So, yeah, I am going to be ordering it as soon as the show is over. More details on loftycoffee.com or follow their Instagram at loftycoffeeco. You can always find links in this show's notes or on roastwestcoast.com. If you haven't already heard them, be sure to go back and check out previous Roast West Coast interviews. Last week, I talked to Matt Della Rosa of Ironsmith Coffee, and we have our ongoing Coffee Smarter sessions with Chris O'Brien, founder of Coffee Cycle in Pacific Beach. He'll be back this Friday and every Friday during Season 1. This upcoming week, he's going to teach us all about the traditional coffee tasting method employed by coffee roasters and shop owners, known as cupping. Whatever podcast platform you are listening on, please follow this show and consider writing a review. I'd really appreciate it, and it really helps other coffee lovers find this podcast. If you subscribe to the newsletter on roastwestcoast.com, you'll get weekly updates and links to all of the shows, insider discounts on coffee, and even a giveaway or two. Some awesome Skywalker art wooden sticker packs are going to be sent out to a few lucky subscribers soon. I want to thank the Coast News Group for collaborating with me on this project. Check out the coastnews.com's podcast directory. You're going to find this show there, you're going to find my other show, Cheers North County, and plenty of other great content, including the North County Beat podcast, hosted by my friend and colleague, Kelly Kyle. One last reminder, this episode of the Roast West Coast podcast was sponsored by Steady State Coffee Roasting. They are a small batch roastery dedicated to the craft and care of providing specialty, responsibly sourced coffee from around the world. Learn more about their process on steadystateroasting.com, where you can order coffee beans to be delivered right to your door. Don't forget to use Roast West Coast's listener promo code OWL10 on steadystateroasting.com. This episode of the Roast West Coast podcast has been produced and recorded by me, Ryan Wolt. Thank you for listening. Be swell out there, try to stay sane, and, as always, drink good coffee.